Rhema means the active, personal, and specific word, the present tense word of the Lord. And that is something that we measure, because it's, when I look throughout the scriptures, every time there's an encounter, and you guys can do your work here, every time there's an encounter with the glory of God, it is always accompanied by the voice of the Lord. In other words, everywhere where God is, He's speaking.
Thank you for watching the MAPS Global Podcast, where we discuss leadership and culture within the convergence of worship, prayer, and missions in your neighborhood and in the nations.
Hello. Hi, everyone. Hello,
Let's
everyone.
go.
We are back. We're back with another MAPS
Let's go.
Global Podcast. It is me, her, she, Mimi.
Those
are my pronouns.
No lies detected. No lies detected.
Those are my pronouns. And this is Ari Martinez.
Yep.
He can go by any pronoun that you want.
No comment.
I don't even know where that came from. But anyways, the man, no longer the myth, always a legend. We are back with another we're excited.
That's
for
true.
This podcast.
We're back. Okay,
so
yes, okay.
We are excited for this podcast. We have been talking about our non-negotiables. So we've done 2 already.
Yes.
Okay. Do you remember?
I don't know if
they
they've released or not, but we've done them.
Well, by the time that they listen to this, they should have released.
Should have.
So, you know what? There are 4 non-negotiables that
We have recorded 2.
We've recorded 2, and this is the 3rd, right?
We are at the mercy of the mobilization environment.
Yes, we just do the podcasts. We record them, but we have not too much.
We don't even know if they're even going to be out there. We don't even know if there's people listening right now.
Hopefully
We
they
could be
get-
talking to ourselves.
Hopefully this gets.
But hey,
edited
good company.
out.
Good company. Good company. So there's 4 non-negotiables.
Okay, so 4 non-negotiables.
Yeah, we did one episode on joy and the enjoyment of life.
Right.
The second one we did was on what was the second one we did?
The second one we did
Servant
was on
leadership. Servant leadership. Which when I'm a visual guy, I'm got a photographic memory, so I'm looking at my notes. Servant leadership's number 4, but this
Wow,
number
what
2.
a brag.
No, no big deal.
A brag to a friend. I need to.
No big deal.
And then the 3rd one that we're doing is presence.
Which is the first one
The
in
most
priority,
important.
from which all the others are based on. But
Yes.
the third one we're doing is our non-negotiable, a non-negotiable here at MAPS, and that's cultural language
Yes.
for us. We have 4 non-negotiables, and they're not negotiable.
Yeah.
Which
We don't
means we
compromise,
don't
we don't
compromise them.
negotiate.
If these things we're not experiencing these things, that's right.
Yeah.
If we're not experiencing these things in our environment, we stop everything we're doing
Yes.
and we go back and get these things, and then we move forward.
Yeah.
And so today we're going to do the non-negotiable of God's presence.
Presence of God.
And then the next episode we'll do the non-negotiable of personal growth and development.
Yes.
So presence.
Yeah. So we're going to talk about it, and we bring it into our world, right? With
Yes.
these non-negotiables. These are the non-negotiables that we have built our organization on, that we're building our culture on. And so we're peeling back the curtain, as we like to do.
Mm-hmm.
And so what we're going to be, we want to talk about how we've built an environment where the presence of the Lord is at the center,
Mm-hmm.
and also, what about what we mean by presence of
Yes,
God being a non-negotiable.
it's great,
right? Okay, so let's take it in. So RA, when we talk about the presence of God being a non-negotiable,
Yeah.
what do you mean by that?
Another phrase we use that's synonymous is present-centered.
Yes.
That we're a present-centered people. We're a present-centered church.
Yeah.
We're
It's a little
part.
more descriptive
We're,
too.
yeah, we're part of a present-centered movement. And what that means is that we have built our life together, both as individuals and corporately. We build our life revolving around the central reality of God's presence.
Right.
So everything we do is orbiting around the central reality, which is God's presence. Which, for me, I'll do a couple minutes on this. This won't be the whole podcast, but for me, that is New Testament ecclesiology. That's what New Testament church is. That's Pauline ecclesiology. I'm thinking of Ephesians 2. I have it open right here. Ephesians 2. The whole thing's amazing, but for the sake of time, he says, verse. Let's start. Oh gosh, it's all good. 19. So you are no longer strangers and aliens, but fellow citizens with the saints and the members of the household of God. It's Ephesians 2:19. He's talking to the church in Ephesus, talking to Gentiles.
Yep.
Ephesus being modern day Turkey. And he says, you guys, you Gentiles, you're no longer strangers and aliens, but you're fellow citizens with the saints and members of the household of God, God's family. Built on the foundation of the apostles and prophets, Christ Jesus himself being the chief cornerstone. And here's the two of my favorite verses when it comes to describing present-centered. It says, Jesus is the cornerstone, right? In him, the whole structure, that's the household of God, is being joined together, and it grows into a holy temple in the Lord. Ephesians 2:22, verse 22. In him, you are also being built together into a dwelling place for God by the Spirit. So Paul's understanding of church is that through the finished work of the cross, God is uniting people from many different races, ethnos, backgrounds, Jew and Gentile, ultimately, uniting them together in a new family, and that family is a priesthood, and the way they live together and build together, they live and build as if that family, as if those people are a temple where God dwells in their midst, and they are the new family that ministers to him. When Paul says temple, he's got a very clear understanding of what he's saying. Yeah. Because he's Jewish, and so when he's saying temple, he's talking about the reality of Solomon's temple that then was torn down and rebuilt. But that whole temple reality was built on the pattern of David's tabernacle.
Awesome, yeah.
Right? So David brought the Ark of the Covenant, God's presence and throne, set it in the center of Jerusalem in a tent, and then he put 24 families of 24 elders surrounding it, and they worshipped to the glory of God on the Ark of the Covenant night and day. It's called David's tabernacle. Yeah. We've done plenty of podcasts on that. Here's the point. David's tabernacle was the order that became the temporary structure that became permanent in Solomon's temple, where that glory rested in the Holy of Holies, and there was a family, Levi, who was priests, and their job, their life together was to come in and out before the Holy of Holies and minister to the Lord and keep that sanctuary, the place where God would dwell among them. Fast forward, finished work of the cross, Pentecost, initiation of a new priesthood. And Paul says to the church in Ephesus, now you, foreigners, strangers cut off, are now brought in to the family of God, and you yourselves are being built together into a temple where God dwells.
Wow.
And so, in Paul's ecclesiology, what church looked like to Paul was a priestly family that their life together revolved around ministering to the Lord and keeping his presence in their midst. And it's God's presence that makes us distinct from any other institution or nation on the earth. It's not our branding, it's not our language, it's not our marketing. It's God's presence that makes us distinct, just like it was God's presence that made Israel distinct. And so church is for God.
Right.
Church is for God, a people where God dwells among. And so then the people priest. And that might be a new concept to you as well. If you've listened to the podcast, then you're familiar with it. But it's a family who builds their life, their rhythms, their day-to-day, their gatherings around the presence of God. They engage with God's presence as much or more than they engage with anything else. And it's clear in the whole counsel of
Yes.
God, Genesis to Revelation, particularly in the New Testament, it's clear that some of the primary ways that we engage with God's presence corporately is in worship and prayer.
Yeah.
It's also in community,
Right.
in unity and love. But it's unity, love, community in corporate prayer and worship, where God manifests or comes in a way that is distinct from how he is present in all of our individual lives.
Okay. I love that.
Yeah, and that's important
It's
because
very important.
yeah, because a lot of people go, why do we need to do that? I can just experience God at my
Yes.
home in my quiet time. And you go,
Yes.
yeah, for sure you can, and you should. The corporate doesn't replace the individual,
Right.
but the individual is not the full expression of Christianity.
That's so important.
There's a corporate expression to Christianity itself that cannot be ignored or cannot be lived out in an individual way. In fact, most of the times in the New Testament that Paul talks about the church being a temple, the you there is plural. It's not. There's only one time where he says your body is a temple of the Holy Spirit, so don't be joined to a prostitute, and that you is individual. But the point is, Christianity is a corporate expression.
Yeah.
And so Jesus himself in Matthew 18, and I'll wrap that up with this, said, when 2 or 3 of you gather together in my name,
Yeah.
I am in your midst. You have to ask the question, well, I thought you were already with me, Lord.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
You're already with me. You're indwelling Christ in me, the hope of glory. The Spirit is indwelling in me. I have access to the Lord at any moment to moment, to hear his voice, experience his presence. And yet there's a different dynamic when 2 or 3, when there's a gathering of the saints together. God, in his pleasure, because he loves the family, he shows up, or he comes in a way that's dynamically different than just how he does to individuals. And it's his manifest presence.
Yes.
And that's what we'll get into now.
How we
experience and how we measure the manifestation
Right.
of that. But the point, when we say presence-centered or presence is a non-negotiable, it's because it's God's presence that makes us distinct from anything else, and it's God's presence that we build everything around, and it's God's presence that makes anything we do fruitful.
Yes.
I'm thinking of Exodus 33. Moses said, the Lord comes to Moses and said, I'm going to send you up to the promised land. I'll send an angel with you.
Yeah.
And Moses goes, no. If you don't go with us, the promised land is nothing.
Yeah.
It's just more work.
Yeah.
But if you go with us, then take us up here. Don't take us up from here unless you go
Yes.
with us, because it's your presence
Yes.
that is our joy, it's our delight, and it's also what makes us distinct. It's what makes us who we are, is
Yes.
your presence in us and around us and on us. So Moses so wonderfully prayed, do not bring us up from here unless your presence goes with us, which I think is just...
Yeah, Moses was incredible. I think, anyway, I find it interesting how Moses, all of the prophets really had certain weaknesses about them, but I'm amazed at his journey into in communion with the Lord.
Totally.
During that time. And one of the things was the times that he would ask God, show me your glory, the desire to see and to know God and to be close with him always.
And it was an ever-increasing journey, because he prays, show me your glory, in Exodus 33. After, a few verses after, it says he went into the tent of meeting and spoke to God face to face.
Wow.
And yet, and that's the wonderful journey and exploration of the knowledge of God, is the more you taste and see, the more you want to taste and see. Yeah. And so after speaking with God face to face, the groan in his heart is, show me your glory.
Yes.
Which is amazing. And to the effect where he says, I don't even care about the promises and the realization of the plan if you're not in it.
Yes.
It's only good if you're in it. And that's the intimacy and the desire for God's presence that's a sign of spiritual health, and it's a sign of spiritual health within a community. And so that leads us to, that's our first non-negotiable, is God's presence.
Yeah.
We have that same cry at MAPS Global, that in our hearts and in our DNA, that Moses said, don't bring us up. We don't want to do the assignment. We don't want to get the 7-year vision, 7 bases, cross 1040 window, great commit. only
Yes.
bring us up here if your
You are
presence
with
is with
us.
us and we
Yeah.
can live. I mean, the prayer I've prayed, this prayer, this 2-line prayer I've prayed since I was 14 years old, and has been the navigator of my life. Every decision that I've made has been in light of this prayer that I started praying when I was 14, and it was, God, let me live in your presence and see your power. Let me live in your presence and see your power. And that prayer has taken me all over the earth.
Yeah.
But it's not because it was my ambition to go all over the earth. It's my desire to be in his presence has
Yeah.
taken me all over the earth. And so when I started to build out the anchor values of our
Yes.
family, that was number one, is God's presence.
So it's like we want to be a people who are known for loving the presence of the Lord.
And known by his presence. That when people come in contact with us, they come in contact with the presence of the living
Yes.
God.
And we want to cultivate a space where the Holy Spirit is always moving, always active.
Yes, that God's presence is manifesting in a way that's tangible and undeniable.
Yeah.
Which
That's
is
so
what
good.
was the reality of the early church.
Yes.
You know,
Yeah.
when they walked in and when they interacted with the early church, the world around them, they weren't marveling at the early church's politics. They were marveling at the power that was on the early church, because someone was alive in their meetings.
Yeah.
And so one day a crippled man comes out completely healed. Another day they drag a dead body out that died at the altar. Like
Yes.
something's alive in there.
Yes.
And that power dynamic of God's presence in the midst of the early church was the magnet.
Right.
I love it's Acts chapter 5, after they drag Ananias and Sapphira out. It says, and fear came upon the whole city, and numbers were added to them daily.
Yeah.
That fear, it was a realization that there's something alive in the midst of that people that's more powerful than me, and there's a holy fear that it's also a holy drawing into his presence. And numbers are being added, not because it was great branding on the meeting, but numbers are being added because God was in their midst. And that's my great, you're starting to touch like my deepest desires for why we exist, but that's my great desire for MAPS Global and all of our bases, is that the magnet and the draw is not our branding or our messaging, but it's the presence of God, which means we labor to cultivate and to minister to and to build an environment where God's presence likes to dwell, which is worship, prayer, and love and unity.
Great. So let's talk about.
That's why the house of prayer, if you want to know, is because it's the environment where God enjoys manifesting his presence.
Yeah. And I think about how, you say not is not enough.
Yes.
Right. And so when MAPS Global was being birthed and you were thinking about what are our whys.
Yes.
And you're thinking about our values, our mission and our vision. And then you're like, well, what are the things that we are never going to compromise on? The things that if these things cease to be, or we stop pursuing these things, it's going to be a warning sign for us to stop and pause.
Yes.
I'm wondering, what was the inspiration around presence? Like was there something that you saw before where you're like, hey, we cannot risk not putting this? Because what we do is we have moments of corporate prayer together every single day.
Yeah.
There's a moment where we gather together, but also a lot of our jobs are really distinct one from the other. And so I'm just wondering, like, what was the process there of deciding on the presence of the Lord? Were you ever in a situation where you're like, hey, this is...
Yeah, I think there's 2 or 3 things. One,
and then we'll get into what we do.
Yeah. That's a great question. There's 2 or 3 things that come to my mind when you say that. Number one is that I knew that because of the mission and vision that the Lord Jesus was put on my life, that's being expressed to this family, I knew that it was going to take more than just a personality-driven ministry. It had to be God's presence. And I think, too, that the presence-centered way of doing church guards us from personality-centered and personality-driven. And you go, well, what do you mean? I'll give you an example. I say this all the time. I want, in a present-centered reality, I want our staff, our church members, our global family, I want them to see the back of my head in the prayer room or on my knees before the Lord in worship more than they see the front of my face in preaching. Now, they don't think I'm not devaluing preaching. I'm just saying that's not the most important thing.
Mm-hmm.
The most important thing is they see me priest to the Lord.
Modeling
to be a priest to the Lord.
Mm-hmm.
And modeling that for the family. And calling the family to join with me in priesting to the Lord, which is why I'm always up front. Not because I think I'm the most important, because I know that I'm setting the tone and the culture for how we're going to come into the presence that day. And so I think it's not enough. The knot that I didn't want to fall into was a personality based or personality driven ministry where this whole thing was based on my gift mix and my personality, and I became the magnet.
Good, yeah.
Partly because I'm not that magnetic. Number two is because I think that builds a certain expression of church that may not be church at all, so or just a lopsided expression of churches based on a personality, and then men and women can only carry so much before they're crushed. And I think we've seen 100%. Seen that. So that was one, and I think that is the future of the church. I think the future of the church in the next 10, 20 years is going to be more presence driven. The presence
of the Lord.
Presence and personality of Jesus is going to be the magnet, not the main speaker or main face. And it's going to be more priestly than it is performance. And so that was one. Number two, I realized very quickly, because the way that I was called into Frontier Missions was supernatural. And I won't tell the story on the podcast, but you can find it because it's out there. It's on our documentary. But it was an audible voice of God and global earthquake. And so my point in saying that is not like, look at me. My point is that I realized very early on that I was being given an assignment from heaven, that I didn't have the resources, the power, the charisma, the personality to pull off. And that it was completely dependent, Zechariah 4, not by might or power, but by my spirit, says the Lord. And so I knew, and then he put me into a sector of ministry called Frontier Missions that is the most underfunded, under-resourced, under everything. And I just came very early on to the realization that it's only the manifest presence of God that's going to carry us through to the very assignment he's given me. And that my job is not to make missionaries. My job is to build an environment where God's presence can manifest and people can come into the face of the Lord of the harvest. And so I think just that realization early on that I don't have the goods to pull this off drove me to the feet of Jesus, which then drove me to build a context where everyone could come to the feet of Jesus and realize that I don't have what it takes. And I say this a lot. You've probably heard me say it. If you're currently walking out an assignment that you think is from the Lord, then that you can do in your own power, with your own might, with your own resources, it might not be from the Lord, because He always pulls us out of beyond that and out of those comfort zones to require intimacy and to show off His glory. Through weak people that have no business carrying the kind of assignments they have. And that's the story of Paul, obviously, and every single person that God ever used in history.
From the Old Testament all the way through.
He uses weak things to shame the wise, because He gets glory out of that. And so anyways, that's my two answers to how did I shift, or where was that shift for me. But I was marked early on. I mean, 16, 17 years old, I read a book called God Chasers by Tommy Tenney, who went around to different moves of God in revival, and he basically chronicled the different experiences and the things that were true, consistent in each of these things. And one of the things that he noted in these different moves of God is that one of the consistent values is that there was a hunger and a groan for the glory of God. And I just got marked by that as a 17-year-old kid. I remember me and my two best friends and a couple youth group, we didn't know anybody doing this, but we would just like do these 3-day fasts, and the parents were all calling our youth pastor concerned because they weren't.
What are you teaching our kids?
Well,
they're not eating.
No, they were like, they're not eating lunch at school, and their teachers are worried. We were high schoolers, and we would get in the attic of our church, and we would just cry. And we didn't have very much Bible at all, but we had this one prayer: "Show me your glory." And we would just pray it, and about 6 to 8, 9 months later, the glory of God dropped, and we went into a season of revival for about 1.5 years. And I just got marked by that.
Yeah.
Where all of a sudden our youth group went from 10 to like hundreds of kids basically in months because of nothing else except for the presence of God. And we had hundreds and thousands of kids gathering monthly.
Wow.
And there was like, the preaching was fine. It was all worship and presence. And it just marked my philosophy of ministry. Like if you build an environment and you get God in the room, everybody else gets ministered to. If you try to manufacture and try to get people in the room without getting God in the room, then you're just responsible for a bunch of stuff you've got to manage. And so that carried me through, gosh, that was 20 years ago. So
I think the reason I asked that is because we've taken, best practice from industries like how do you build a healthy organization, right? It hasn't just been on Christian principles. I don't know if that's the correct way of putting it.
Yeah, we went out into the organizational world and found practices and
not from people that were not just necessarily from church leaders, although we do utilize that, but I think the idea of building even organization that is God-centered, I think is new. I'd never heard of that before, where it's like this is at the center of how we are building for a missions sending organization. We are a church first and foremost, 100%. But I think even when we consider, this is just a commentary and then we're going to go into the next question, but when we consider a pioneering ministry, right, which is most of what we are, if that is not the fullness, we pioneer a lot of things on a pioneering basis overseas. And I think what we do here not only releases assignments, like when the presence of the Lord is present, when he's present, also assignments are released and people are released into their destinations, and you don't have to convince them.
And that's Antioch. That's Acts 13. While they were ministering to the Lord, while they were liturgeo, the Holy Spirit set apart for me, Saul and Barnabas. And so that's, I went on that journey, and with the Antioch book that I released almost a year ago now, it was, Antioch gave me the New Testament framework and language for all these values that I had been collecting, and I didn't have a place to. I had all these values, like how do I put it together? And when I got to Acts 11 and Acts 13, and then the New Testament narrative, I saw it all converge in one place. While they were ministering to the Lord, rhythm of life, priestly. Liturgia is a priestly term. While this New Testament priesthood is daily coming in and out before the Holy of Holies, ministering to the Lord, the Holy Spirit gave assignments that became mission movements. And so that's where I got the greenhouse language. And so Antioch, for me, what you just described Acts 13 too. And that's where it all came together for me. And this is work that myself, guys like Billy Humphrey, and a lot of my friends are doing, is to mine into a New Testament ecclesiology for the church right now, in this generation, that moves it from man-centered back to God-centered, and personality-driven to present-centered, and from performance back to priestly, and from business to family, and all these things has to do with the presence of God in the center of what we do.
That's awesome. Wow. So let's talk about what are some of the things that we do that actually are an example of like, this is because we want to be a God-centered people.
That's because if it's our number one non-negotiable, then for me, and this is how I build, because you lead with me, I want to know, I'm not okay with just saying, "Hey, we're going to do this," without metrics and without evaluation and whether we're actually hitting it.
Yes.
Wins, losses, lessons learned. And for me, it's just it's probably the J part of me, but in terms of my Myers-Briggs.
Yeah.
But and so when we got to these non-negotiables or these value anchors, and we said the presence of God is our number one non-negotiable, then my immediate question was, well, how do we measure that?
Yeah.
Because I think, unless someone's just way off in left field, I think everyone would say that's a value, right?
Yes. 100%.
So what do we mean when we say that? And then how do we measure it? So if it's not happening, we can make the appropriate adjustments to get there if we're actually saying it's a non-negotiable.
Yeah.
And so that was the conversation. And this was 8 years ago. And so we went through a few weeks, maybe months of really teasing out, well, what do we mean by God's presence? And then how are we going to set some metrics so that we can constantly evaluate it if it's truly a non-negotiable to us? And we came up with 3 to 4. One of them became our second non-negotiable. But we came up with 3 to 4 metrics or measurements, or just how we as Maps Global, and I'm not saying this is the comprehensive definition of God's presence. So I'm just saying this is how we at Maps Global, how we're constantly, is this happening?
Yes. Our gauge.
Yeah, it's our gauge. Yeah. It's our meter. It's our temperature, thermometer for God's presence. So the first one is actually...
You're going to say uno.
Uno.
The number one.
Numero uno.
Anyway, carry on.
Primera.
Stop.
is the first one, which actually then morphed into a non-negotiable, and that's joy.
Yes.
And so that's now one of our non-negotiables. It started as a metric for how we measure God's presence.
How
because
joyful we are.
Because Psalm 16:11, in your presence is fullness of joy. In your presence is fullness of joy, and at your right hand are pleasures forevermore. Yeah. And so there's something about God's presence that can be measured by joy. And and then you get to Isaiah 56. I'm going to bring the nations, the foreigners, into my holy mountain, and I'm going to make them joyful in my house of prayer. And so joy is a metric for us, even if we're doing the house of prayer right, according to the Bible. And,
according to the word.
Yeah, and then joy is the essential nature of God. So we've done that podcast, so I won't go there. But that was, in the early days, that was one of our metrics for presence, and it just became so clear that that's a non-negotiable for us. So the second way we measure, and we're tuning in to whether God's presence is active in our midst, is His Word. His Word. Both the illumination of the written Word. It is the Bible opening up to us as a spiritual family. Yeah. Do we know, and this is like, you know this because you've been around for enough seasons to know, like, if you were to come into Maps and say, hey, what's Maps studying in the Bible right now? People would have an answer to that. Because there's a mode of preaching and teaching we're doing where we're together as a family experiencing the presence of God in His Word. And we're not just kind of picking series out of the air. We're saying, God, what are you saying to us out of your Word? And so it's the written word. It's also the rhema. That's a Greek word for that some of the New Testament writers use for the word of the Lord. And it's different than the logos, which is another word used for word. Rhema means the active, personal, and specific word, the present tense word of the Lord. And that is something that we measure, because it's, when I look throughout the scriptures, every time there's an encounter, and you guys can do your work here, every time there's an encounter with the glory of God, it is always accompanied by the voice of the Lord. In other words, everywhere where God is, He's speaking. Yeah. And then sometimes, like Revelation 1, it's the voice that John hears first before he actually sees the glory. Yeah. And so for me, when I said, how do we know if God's presence It can't just be subjective to everyone in the room. Did I get goosebumps today or not? That's
Yes,
great.
yes.
But how do we know that God's present in our midst, that he's going up before us, Exodus 33? And we landed on because we all know what he's actively speaking.
Yeah. There's agreement.
In the word and through prophetic.
Yeah.
And so then we build around that. So then in order to know if God is actively speaking, you've got to ask the question, what is God saying?
Yes.
And so early on, now it's once a month. It used to be every week.
Wow.
And just like because of the scale of the organization, like I had to give people a break. But regularly, I'm in the room, you're in the room too. Regularly, once a month. Right now, it used to be every week. I'm sitting in a room for hours.
Yeah.
This is not a 30-minute touch point.
No.
This is hours on a Friday morning.
Yeah.
And it's not a tactical meeting. It's not a strategic meeting. We're not talking about business. We are in the room and we're only asking one question. What is God saying to us right now?
Yeah.
And then there's probably, at this point, I don't know, 12, 15 leaders in the room, something like that. And all of our wives that are married. And some of our husbands. And,
I wanted to say our wives were married
our spouses, yes. Our wives, our executives, our wives are in the room. Husbands are in the room for the wives that
we
are.
just have to be careful.
Yes. Not all of my wives. I have one wife that I'm in covenant with for life. And she is more than enough.
Yes.
More than enough.
Yes.
Anyways, like take that clip and it goes viral. And now Maps is into polygamy.
Oh gosh.
Anyways, with the wives, the spouses of our executives, because our wives are that's probably one of the all of our wives work, in around the ministry. We have a culture where our families are very involved, but that's one place where I insist we're all together in terms of our primary leaders. There's not one primary leader in the culture of Maps that's not in that meeting. And what we do is for hours, we say, what is God saying? And we start to process people who had dreams, prophetic words, visions in the prayer room, scriptures that were illuminated, what happened in a meeting or in two meetings that we all sense something. So let's get language for that. And we come out not with a sense of here's the next 3 things we're going to launch. We all come out with the sense of this is what God's saying. Yeah. And it infuses everything we're already doing. And sometimes it steers it, but more it's the awareness that God's speaking and we're obeying. We're in line with what God's saying. He's leading us up from here. And so that's part of how when we cultivate that non-negotiable is that I pay all of our main leaders to spend hours a day talking about what God what God's saying.
It's definitely part of what we are paid for.
It's part of your job.
It's part of our jobs, and then I also think there is an enjoyment of entering into that space too. It's one of the meetings that we all look for because we all really love not only knowing who God is, but we actually love to know what God is saying to us corporately.
And there's an experience in that meeting of God's presence. You go, whoa.
Yes.
He's speaking so clear. In 8 years of doing that meeting regularly, I've never walked out of there and went, man, nothing's going on. Literally.
Yeah.
I've walked in a lot of times going, I hope this goes well because I don't have anything on my mind. And 30 minutes in, I'm like, and 7 years, I've never walked out of that meeting going, God's not saying anything.
This morning, we also had a meeting that was another example, I think.
Culture.
Yes, we had culture meeting where this doesn't just manifest at headquarters, right? Sometimes it's the Lord will speak to us globally as a family where we're not even realizing that, what the Lord is doing here at headquarters is also doing in all of our bases, but in different ways until our leaders are given, a moment like, what's God saying to you? And they're all saying, well, this is just what he's saying. Was like, he's saying the same thing to us.
So this morning, all 4 of our bases, they were getting on to give an update on, we're about to do a 50 hours in the across the 1040 window all together. And so each base was going to say, hey, this is what we're feeling like God's saying and leading. unprompted,
Yes.
they all said the exact
Yes.
same thing.
Yes.
And so before I even got up, I went, note,
Yes.
God's speaking.
Yes.
Because you got four base leaders in four different countries spread out across the 1040 window, all saying the same language in the same way. And I went, okay, God's speaking.
Right.
And so anyways, to wrap that point one up, how we measure God's presence is by his active word, where the illumination of the scriptures and the prophetic rhema now sense of God's word that we're actively pursuing, we're paying attention to, and it always just, and we've learned lessons along the way. These days, I don't do much of anything without it. Like it takes, I want to say I don't do anything without it, but I don't want to exaggerate. But there's very few, if not any directional, major decisions of the organization I don't make without this and without the prophetic informing it.
That's good.
And that's why we had to do such work on putting the prophetic in its right place so it doesn't get squirrely and weird on us.
I do want to say that is something that I've appreciated, that very rarely is there, if at all, I haven't yet felt it, the whiplash of, but I thought this is what the Lord was saying before. Now this is because the prophetic is not in the driver's seat. We say
that's
that.
right. Yeah.
So for those of you listening, and when Randy's saying he doesn't make any decisions, he does not make impetuous decisions. I've experienced that. Like, it's not impetuous in any way.
Usually it's about 6 months or 2 years of information that's slowly gathered that I put together and go, okay, we can have confidence through the written word and through the prophetic encounters that God's saying to go in this direction. I'm a very slow mover, you know this.
Yes.
But it's because I want to be sure that I don't want to take people on prophetic whiplash. God's saying this. No, he's saying this. No, he's saying this. No, we'll come back to that. You know, I've been in environments with that. It's very emotionally, it's very hard to stay connected. So
good. Okay. Second one.
Yeah, number 2, metric for how we measure God's presence is peace, the lack of chaos. When God when the presence of God is manifesting, there's a lot of activity, but there's not chaos, because he's full of peace, order, not in the sense of control. He's full in control, but in the sense of there's not a sense of anxiety, fear, chaos, out of control in a bad way. And so there's been many times, and I can give you 10 Bible verses if you want on that, but in terms of the peace of God being something that crushes satanic activity. And I've just over the years become more and more aware that when I start to feel that thing of like, it feels like situations, people, resources, money, it's starting to feel a little chaotic and a little like just like not peaceful. That's when I pause and go, we need to go back and make sure that the presence of God is permeating this situation, or we're hearing from heaven rightly. I'm not saying it's that when God's presence comes in, it's completely static. Sure. It's not. There's lots of activity. When God moves, everything moves. Yes. Angels move, demons move, people move, emotions move, everything moves. And it's like, but there's a peace in it, and there's a security and a confidence and love that is in the presence of God, that in the absence of God's presence or the waning of God's presence, I'm talking about his manifest corporate presence. He doesn't wane in his presence in your soul, in your spirit. But the environment, when we start to get a little bit away, or the one thing stops becoming the one thing, and we start, all of a sudden situations and things start to happen, they get my attention. Like, this feels like out of control, or like there's no answer to that. Yeah. And that's where I go, pause. We need to run back to the feet of Jesus and make sure that we're living and cultivating his presence, because I've found that when you run to the feet of Jesus and cultivate his presence, he answers 1,000 questions, and he deals with 1,000 fires that without it you would be running around constantly trying to put out. And so peace, the absence of chaos and confusion, that's the word I was looking for, is for me a metric of God's presence. When I start to look around the room and I see confusion in my leaders, that's when I pause and I go, wait, we got to go back to, or there's a strange voice or a strange presence coming in to the family. When confusion and chaos comes in. God never causes confusion and chaos. He always brings clarity and comfort. Right. And so that's how I measure when I'm sitting in the seat I'm in to father the family. I'm constantly going, okay, I'm looking around the room and all of our leaders in our environments. Is there comfort and clarity and confidence and love, or is there chaos and confusion? Are there strange voices coming in?
Yeah.
And you know this because you've been around. When strange voices come in, I did it this morning at Culture, I stand up and say, this is not allowed.
Yes.
Not you're a bad person.
Yes.
This demonic.
Yes, very good.
This demonic, strange voice is not the voice of God. We did it this morning.
Yeah.
And so I'm going to identify it.
Right.
Because that's part of the a shepherd's role, is to help you identify strange voices and reject them. And I just noticed in the past, a lot of times I'll be in 3 or 4 different conversations over the course of the week, and they'll all say the same thing to me. And I'll recognize phrases and go, oh, this is a strange voice coming in. It's a demonic attack.
Yes, it's very good that you said that. I was just going to clarify again, when we talk about voices, we're not talking about a specific
I'm not talking about people.
person.
No, I'm talking about people. I'm talking about
demonic,
the voice of accusation, the voice of isolation, the voice of fear.
Yes.
These are all voices that if we allow in, it will try to drown out the voice of God in the presence of God. Yes. And so the same with chaos. When I notice that chaos and confusion starting to set in, there's a lack of peace. That's when I go, pause. We need to deal with something so that the presence of God can be cultivated and we don't give in to strange voices. And
good.
So that's number 2.
Is there a third one?
There is.
Okay.
Would you like to hear it?
Yes, please.
This one's the most subjective one, so I'll say that for the room. So again, it's just as we.
Okay,
go
also, ahead. One of the things that I've also really appreciated is that when we're talking about peace, is that there've been moments where there's discernment, right? So it's like the Lord really helps us with discernment. The more we lean into His voice, the more we are able to discern the voice of the Lord. And so one of the things that I've also appreciated is in moments when we may think, oh, this is so demonic. It's like, no, it's actually not demonic. It's behavioral.
Totally.
and so you've
for us, we don't chase. There's not demon behind every bush kind of thing.
Yes. And so you've also been good at calling those things out.
Totally.
You know what I mean? And so there's a balance. I think this is what I know that we're in very much in a world right now where this is the Lord and that is the Lord, and a lot of people are getting a little bit of a bitter taste towards skeptical is a good word of that language. And I just want to say that I've seen, and we are being discipled and mentored into a balance of the holy and God, and then also self-awareness.
And the human.
And the
holy and the human.
Yes.
Because there's a lot that's just human.
Yes.
It's not demonic.
Yes.
It's just human behavior that needs to be developed.
Yes.
Like Susie's bad attitude might not be demonic. It might just mean she needs to mature in how to regulate her emotions. Yes. Or Billy, regulating his emotions and not just lashing out every time he's triggered kind of thing.
Right. Good.
I literally just had that pastoral conversation an hour ago.
Yeah.
It's not a demon. It's just you're recognizing family of origin, things that that have informed the way you behave, and now you've got to reset that and learn to grow, because you can't take that into your marriage and treat your wife that way.
Right.
And so, anyways,
number 3.
This is the most subjective one, and so I honor that. Like, this is just how we measure it again, and it's not a comprehensive definition of God's presence. You'll have to go to A.W. Tozer for that. But for me, the third metric of when we say the presence of God is a non-negotiables is the activity of the Holy Spirit in our midst through the gifts of the Spirit and the fruit of the Spirit, but that goes back to development. But the gifts of the Spirit that Paul talks about in 1 Corinthians 12 and in other places in the New Testament. The power gifts, or the power dynamic of God's presence. I'll say it that way. We've probably done a number of podcasts on this, but Isaiah chapter 61 is a very important passage for us as a spiritual family. It's an important passage to Jesus too, because he read it about his own ministry. But in there, you have these statements that require demonstration.
Yeah.
Right? You have these statements that it's hard to spiritualize away or allegorize away, like it either happened or it didn't,
Yeah.
you know, and it has to do with physical, emotional, spiritual, mental, psychological healing and restoration. And so I am constantly measuring the subjective. Again, it's subjective and this is why you need leaders and why you need to do this in teams, because you've got to evaluate like the manifestation of the Spirit and the gifts of the Spirit and the feeling, the tangible feeling of God's presence in the room. Those are all what I put under this category of manifestations.
Good.
I don't mean people falling over in a prayer line. That's not a biblical manifestation. People get tripped up on that. I talk about the gifts of the Spirit, and they go, "Oh, somebody's gonna push me down a prayer line." I go, "What? That's not a gift of the Spirit."
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
Slain.
I'm not talking about charismatic silliness.
Yeah.
I'm talking about the real, genuine, undeniable power of God that's present and active in His presence. The reason the Son of God was made manifest, the reason He manifests His presence, is to destroy the works of the evil one. And so, words of knowledge, words of wisdom, prophecy, gifts, plural, of healing, working of miracles, tongues and interpretation of tongues. I think that's languages.
Yeah. Faith.
Discernment, faith. Later on in the chapter, administration, help. There's actually 11 gifts of you, right? And I know the 9 gifts, 9 fruit. I love that, but there's actually 11 gifts. And there's probably 20 gifts, but gifts, administrating, the power tools to love that are given, Paul says, to the church to build up the body and grow in love. And so I'm measuring those. We actively pursue those because Paul told us to, not because we're charismatic. He says, 1 Corinthians 14, pursue love and earnestly desire. Zelo is the Greek word, which means to, as other translated, lust after. It's crazy.
Wow.
In other words, really get a craving and a desire to walk in these things. Pursue love and earnestly desire the spiritual gifts, especially that you may prophesy. That's an apostolic command. So I take that and go, we're going to go after these things. We're going to put the guardrails of the word around it, and then emotional health, because that's huge, you know. But for me, one of the metrics is God's presence permeating and active in our midst is that there's a power dynamic. There's miraculous things happening within our spiritual family in a manifest way. Healings, physical healings, prophetic words, words of knowledge, deliverance.
Yes.
Deliverance happening, that people are getting freed from demonic oppression, from addictions, that people are getting saved.
Yes.
All these things, these power encounters for us are part of what we mean when we say God's presence. Not all of it, but part of what we mean when we say God's presence. And so in any meeting, corporate meeting you're in at MAPS Global, at any moment, those things would be present.
Yeah.
And honestly, any leadership meeting too, you know.
Absolutely.
And it's because we're cultivating an environment of God's presence, which means we're making room for the third person of the Trinity to distribute those gifts in a way where it'll build the church up in love and edify and strengthen His people. So that's for me the third metric. When we go, like, if you want me to be super real, when we go 2-3 weeks and there's not that dynamic in our weekend services and our prayer, I go, Lord, we need to pause. We need to adjust something, because Isaiah 61, we're in Isaiah 61 prayer room. That's what we are. We're an Isaiah 61 people that's doing the Isaiah 61 people that's doing the Isaiah 62 ministry of giving God no rest night and day. So that's the third way that we measure God's presence, manifest presence in our midst. And we're and this one, as opposed to, or distinct from peace or God. Well, God's voice we do. This one we actively pursue, and make room for, and practice, and train, and because when you say the gifts of the Spirit, who are we talking about? The Spirit. It's the third person of the triune God.
He has gifts to give out.
In other words, the Spirit's is never present where God's not.
Right.
The Spirit is God.
Yeah, it's good.
He's the third person of the Trinity, to be worshipped and fully adored as God.
Yes, it's good.
He's not the crazy uncle that comes in.
Yes.
You know, he's not a wind
or
or a
genie
force or a
that you're
genie.
like,
He's
yeah.
God,
Yeah.
the Spirit. And when he's active in distributing gifts according to his own will, 1 Corinthians 12, that means God is present.
Yeah.
And so that's another metric I use to make sure that our non-negotiable of God's presence, that we're holding to it, we're not compromising on it, we're pressing into it, so that all of the mission and vision and the people in MAPS flourish in God's presence.
It's good. We don't have a lot of time, but I was just wondering give us 2 minutes on those people who want to build this into their rhythm of life, and where do we start? Like, where does a person start?
Yeah, a people, because
that's what I'm trying to say.
Yeah,
yes, it's like, but for that leader, it's like, hey,
totally.
we want to actually encompass this in our rhythm of life.
Yeah, because I think my advice would be a bit different for an individual versus someone who's building a community. For an individual, I'd say cultivate the awareness of God's perpetual presence. John G. Lake talked about that. Brother Lawrence, the practice of the presence of God. When we're talking about individuals, you're talking about learning to develop the consciousness or the awareness of God who's always with you and speaking to you moment to moment. So that's an individual. When I said corporate, a couple things come to mind. How do you build a present-centered reality or a present-centered community? Well, I think number one, you start doing the things that cultivate God's presence. And again, this is not it's for another podcast. I've done 20 on them probably. Prayer, worship, presence worship, singing to the Lord, music. God inhabits those things, it says. Covenantal community, that's a huge word. I mean, love for one another, agreement in prayer together, where 2 or 3 together in agreement. You start doing those things and you don't replace them for anything else. You know, I did a podcast with Matthew Lilly a while back on Antioch on his Presence Pioneered podcast, and he asked me, well, where do I start? I said, irreplaceable prayer meetings, which is a term I borrowed from Billy Humphrey. Irreplaceable prayer meetings. Where do I start? Start a prayer meeting where you're there for God and nothing else, and don't replace it with anything. Don't stop it for anything. And once there's enough momentum on that one, start another one until the rhythm of your community is primarily us before the Lord, not us in front of each other.
Good.
We need in front of each other. Don't hear me say that's not important. Just hear me say we're a priesthood and a temple first.
Yeah.
And then we're a family that's built around that.
Yes.
So we revolve or we orbit around the presence of God. And so as much as Acts 2, we're in house to house and dedicated to the apostles' teaching, we also have to be daily in the temple. Yeah. You know, and so irreplaceable prayer meetings and worship, and make room in worship when you together, and I'm talking about the musical part of worship, when you're designing your services, design it to not just to get the pieces done, but design it to make room for God to come in and be who he is and do what he wants to do, which means you'll have to linger awkwardly long. Often. To get past the here's what we can manufacture. Now we're vulnerable and can't do anything else until God moves. And most people don't want to go past that because we're designing our services to be as comfortable as possible, and waiting on the Lord is uncomfortable. And it's a skill that has to be developed. And so you don't get it the first time you come in. You develop how to create spaces. I like to say cultivate atmospheres. it goes all the way down to your budget sheet.
Mm-hmm.
Like if you say present centered, then you have to look at your budget sheet and say, how much are we spending our resources towards worship
Yes.
and worshipers and prayer and music
Yes.
and dedicated space?
Mm-hmm.
All those things are budget issues.
Yes.
You can't say we're present centered, but none of those things touch your budget
Yes.
sheet, you know?
So good.
And so where the money don't lie, as they say. And so if you can't point to how present centered touches your budget, I think you might need
Wow.
to reevaluate whether you're
That's so
present centered.
deep.
Yeah, it's
That's so
really. I
deep.
mean, let's get real.
That's so deep.
And so part of how we do it is a huge part of our budget goes to maintaining a dedicated space where nothing
Yes.
else happens, and making sure singers and musicians and prophetic creatives are resourced
Yes.
to cultivate an environment where we can come in and enjoy
Yes.
the Lord. And that costs money.
Yes.
And we do that more than we do services.
Yes. More than we have church services for
Mhm.
sure. Yep.
Yeah.
And conferences and
Everything else, yeah.
Mhm.
And I would, more than I do leadership meetings, I'm in prayer meetings.
Yes.
100%.
That's true.
100%.
Yes, that's true.
There you go.
Well, it was so helpful.
So go and enjoy God's presence.
Yes. Love you guys. Thank you for listening, and we will catch you in the next episode. Love you. Bye.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of the MAPS Global Podcast. Make sure to subscribe to this channel and check out previous episodes. Have you seen our 50 Hours documentary? Watch it now. And don't forget to sign up for our email newsletters.